Welcome back, and if you've ever held a dime without really looking at it, what we're about to uncover together might just change the way you see every old silver coin in your collection. Step 1. The 1998 D Roosevelt dime is one of those coins that sits quietly in pocket change, coffee cans, and forgotten desk drawers across America, rarely drawing a second glance from anyone who doesn't already know what to look for. And yet, for the collector who understands its subtle story, this small silver-colored disc carries a weight far beyond its 10-cent face value. Struck at the Denver Mint in 1998, this dime bears the distinctive D mint mark positioned just to the left of the torch on the reverse side, a small but significant letter that tells you exactly where this coin began its life. The Denver Mint in the late 1990s was operating at extraordinary volume, pumping out hundreds of millions of coins annually to meet the relentless demand of a booming American economy, and the 1998 D-dime was no exception, with a reported mintage of approximately 1.172 billion pieces, making it one of the higher production dimes of its era. That enormous number might make you think nothing about this coin could ever be special, but experienced collectors know that high mintage figures are only one piece of a very complex puzzle, and the real story of any coin's value lies not in how many were made, but in how many survived in a condition that time and circulation couldn't touch. Roosevelt dimes as a series have a history that stretches back to 1946, created to honor President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who died in April 1945 just as World War II was nearing its close, and whose association with the March of Dimes polio charity made the 10-cent coin a deeply symbolic tribute. The obverse portrait of Roosevelt, designed by chief engraver John R. Sinek, captures the president in a dignified left-facing profile that has remained essentially unchanged for decades, and by 1998 that design had been refined through half a century of die production into something remarkably consistent, yet consistency in design doesn't mean uniformity in execution. Each working die used at the Denver facility in 1998 was individually hubbed, polished, and prepared, and subtle differences between dies could produce coins with slightly different strike depths, surface textures, and field characteristics that only the trained eye or high-powered loupe can detect. The composition of the 1998 D-dime is clad coinage, a copper core sandwich between outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel, a formula introduced in 1965 when silver was removed from dimes entirely, and this clad construction gives the coin its characteristic silvery appearance with a telltale copper edge stripe visible when viewed from the side. What makes a specific 1998 D-dime worth examining more carefully is the possibility, not the certainty, but the genuine, documented possibility, that among those billion-plus coins, a small number left the Denver Mint with characteristics that set them dramatically apart from the ordinary. Mint errors on Roosevelt dimes from this era have been cataloged and authenticated by organizations like PCGS and NGC, and they include off-center strikes where the design is visibly shifted from the coin's center, double die obverse errors where Roosevelt's portrait or lettering shows a ghost-like doubling effect under magnification, and broad-struck coins that spread slightly beyond their intended diameter due to missing collar restraint during striking. Die cap errors, where a coin sticks to a die and produces a dramatically distorted subsequent strike, have also been documented in the Roosevelt dime series. These aren't theoretical anomalies. They are real, cataloged, graded, and traded coins that have passed through auction houses with verified provenance, and finding one in unexamined original rolls or estate collections is not outside the realm of possibility for a patient and knowledgeable collector willing to do the work. Hold a 1998 D-dime in good light and examine it the way a numismatist would, not casually, but with intention. The obverse should show Roosevelt's portrait with clean, sharp hair detail above the ear and along the back of the neck. On a well-struck high-grade example, you can count individual hair strands where a circulated coin would show only smooth wear. The reverse carries the iconic torch flanked by olive and oak branches, and on top-tier specimens the flame at the torch's crown retains its fine interior lines rather than blending into a flat, featureless shape. The coin's rim should be crisp and even all the way around, rising cleanly above the fields without nicks, dents, or flat spots that would indicate bag marks from bulk coin handling at the mint or later damage in circulation. Under a 5x or 10x loupe, examine the lettering of Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, and one dime carefully. Any doubling, tripling, or mechanical distortion in those letters is a signal worth documenting and sending to a professional for evaluation. Check the coin's weight as well. A genuine 1998 D dime should weigh 2.268 grams, and a significant deviation could indicate either a planchet error or a non-genuine piece, both of which require expert verification before drawing conclusions. Now let's talk about the part that collectors always want to know. What is this coin actually worth, and what does the market say about its potential? A standard circulated 1998 D Roosevelt dime pulled from pocket change is, in honest and straightforward terms, worth face value or just marginally above it, perhaps a few cents to dealers buying in bulk, and that's the realistic baseline that every responsible collector must acknowledge. However, the market changes dramatically when condition enters the conversation. A 1998 D dime graded MS65 by PCGS or NGC, meaning it's a fully uncirculated coin with only minor contact marks and strong luster, might realistically trade in the range of $1 to a few dollars in today's market. Push that grade to MS67 or MS68, where coins become genuinely scarce because so few survived handling without acquiring the microscopic bag marks and luster breaks that disqualify higher grades, and now you're looking at coins that serious registry set collectors will compete over, with examples at those levels sometimes fetching anywhere from tens of dollars to over $100 depending on eye appeal and current market demand. All estimates, of course. Subject to the unpredictable nature of collector markets. The real drama in 1998 D dime collecting happens when a verified mint error enters the picture, and this is where collector storytelling gets genuinely cinematic. Imagine an estate sale in the Midwest, boxes of old rolls tucked into a shoebox that nobody had opened since the late 1990s. And inside one of those rolls, a single dime that looks just slightly wrong, the design tilted, the strike off-center, the fields with an unfamiliar texture. That kind of coin, once authenticated and graded as a legitimate mint error by a top-tier grading service, moves into a completely different market conversation. Verified off-center Roosevelt dimes with significant percentage shifts, say 15% or more off-center while still retaining the date and mint mark, have sold at auction for figures ranging from $100 to several $100s, while more dramatic errors with higher percentage shifts or double strike characteristics have occasionally reached into the low thousands. These are not guarantees of what your specific coin will bring. Coin markets fluctuate, buyer pools change, and condition remains the ultimate arbiter. But they represent documented real transactions that prove the ceiling for this coin can be far higher than its face value suggests when the right circumstances align. Approaching this coin responsibly means understanding the difference between hopping and knowing, and that distinction is what separates the collectors who get burned from those who build genuinely rewarding collections over time. If you believe you found a 1998 D dime with unusual characteristics, a strike that looks doubled, a weight that doesn't match, an alignment that seems off, or a surface texture unlike anything in your reference coins, the single most important step you can take is not to clean it, not to test it aggressively, and not to post it for sale before verification. Cleaning a coin, even gently with water or a soft cloth, can permanently destroy the original mint luster that separates a valuable uncirculated coin from a damaged one, and the numismatic community is unforgiving on this point. Photograph it under raking light from multiple angles, weigh it on a precision scale, compare it carefully to verified examples in published guides like the Red Book or online PCGS and NGC population reports, and then submit it to a reputable third-party grading service if the characteristics genuinely warrant the investment. Authentication is never free, but it's the only way to transform a possibility into a documented, marketable reality that other serious collectors will trust and pay for. There is something quietly extraordinary about the idea that a coin minted in Denver in 1998, one of over 1 billion made that year, designed to be a candy bar or feed a parking meter, might still be out there somewhere, uncirculated, unexamined, possibly with a die variety or mint error that nobody has cataloged yet, sitting in an old roll or a forgotten jar on a shelf in someone's garage. Numismatics has always run on that tension between the ordinary and the exceptional, between the coin that's worth exactly what it says on its face and the one that turns out to be something the market has been quietly waiting for. The 1998 D Roosevelt dime is a reminder that the line between those two things is sometimes thinner than you'd expect, and that patience, knowledge, and the willingness to look carefully at what everyone else has overlooked can occasionally produce results that no one predicted. Next time, we're turning our attention to a coin with an even more layered and contested history, one where a tiny design detail that most people never notice has created a split in the collector community and a price gap that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Step 2. The United States 1978 Roosevelt dime arrived in circulation during a period of American history that was defined by economic turbulence, cultural reinvention, and a collective national restlessness that permeated everything from politics to pop culture. And yet this small coin, modest in size and understated in design, quietly passed through millions of hands without anyone pausing to consider what it might one day represent to the collectors who would eventually seek it out with genuine passion and purpose. Struck at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints in 1978, this coin carries no mint mark if it came from Philadelphia and bears a small D to the left of the torch on the reverse if it originated in Denver, a distinction that matters more than most casual observers would ever suspect, because the two facilities operated under different pressures, different die schedules, and different quality conditions that could produce subtly different results in the finished coins. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 663 million of these dimes in 1978, while Denver contributed an additional 282 million, and together those numbers paint a picture of mass industrial coin production at a scale that feels almost impossible to reconcile with the idea of individual collector value. And yet the numismatic world has a long and well-documented history of proving that rarity is not always about total mintage, but about how many examples survived the brutal gauntlet of circulation, storage, and neglect with their original surfaces fully intact. To understand why the 1978 Roosevelt dime occupies the place it does in American numismatic history, you have to understand the broader context of what was happening inside the United States mint system during the late 1970s. The mint was still operating under the compositional shift that had occurred in 1965, when rising silver prices forced the government to abandon the 90% silver alloy that had defined dimes since the seeded Liberty era, and replace it with the clad sandwich construction that collectors and everyday users know today, a copper core bonded to outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel that gives the coin its familiar bright, slightly cool metallic appearance. By 1978, mint workers and die technicians had spent over a decade refining their processes with this newer material, but clad coinage presented its own distinctive challenges, particularly in how the metal flowed under striking pressure and how the dies wore over the course of their production lifespan. A die in pristine early condition would produce coins with sharper, deeper detail in Roosevelt's portrait and cleaner torch flame lines on the reverse, while a die approaching the end of its service life might yield flatter, more washed-out strikes that technically passed quality control but lacked the crispness that would later define the difference between a coin worth face value and one worth serious collector attention. The visual language of the 1978 Roosevelt dime is deceptively rich when you approach it with the patience and curiosity that the coin genuinely rewards. On the obverse, John Arsenic's portrait of Franklin Delano Roosevelt presents the president in left-facing profile, a design that has remained essentially unchanged since the series debuted in 1946, but on a well-preserved 1978 example the quality of that portrait can vary dramatically depending on the die used, the striking pressure applied, and the condition of the planchet at the moment of impact. On a high-grade specimen, the fine hair texture above Roosevelt's temple and behind his ear remains distinct and countable under magnification, while the jaw line and collar of his coat show clean, crisp separation from the surrounding fields, details that disappear entirely on a coin that spent even a few months in active circulation. The reverse, designed around the central image of a torch representing liberty, flanked by an olive branch symbolizing peace on the left and an oak branch representing strength and independence on the right, tells its own story through the quality of its strike, because the inner flame lines of the torch are among the first details to fade under the twin pressures of die wear and circulation friction, and a coin that retains those lines in full sharp relief is a coin that has led an extraordinarily protected life since the day it left the mint floor. Among the aspects of the 1978 Roosevelt dime that attract serious collector scrutiny are the documented and suspected die varieties that exist within the state, because the sheer volume of dies required to produce nearly 1 billion coins across 2 facilities created natural opportunities for the kinds of subtle mechanical variations that variety specialists spend careers cataloging and debating. Double die errors, in which the hubbing process used to impress the design into the working die produces a secondary, slightly offset impression of lettering or design elements, have been identified in Roosevelt dimes throughout the series, and collectors examining 1978 examples under loupe magnification have noted instances of apparent doubling in the inscription "In God We Trust," in the date numerals, and along the lettering of Liberty. Though not every example of apparent doubling is a genuine hub-doubled die, and mechanical doubling caused by die movement during the strike itself produces a similar visual effect that carries no premium in the collector market. The distinction between these two types requires careful examination by someone who understands the difference in how the doubling presents under angled light, and this is precisely why professional attribution matters so much before any value conclusions are drawn. Repunched mint marks, though less dramatically visible on the 1978D than on earlier Denver issues, represent another area where patient variety hunters have occasionally identified the traces of a previously placed mint mark showing through beneath the primary impression. Running your fingers along the edge of a 1978 Roosevelt dime, and then examining it under a strong light source against a dark background is one of those simple, almost meditative acts that can suddenly shift the entire tone of what you thought was a routine afternoon of going through old coin rolls. The clad composition means the edge should show that distinctive copper-colored stripe sandwiched between the silvery outer layers, a characteristic that immediately distinguishes a genuine clad dime from a silver dime of an earlier era, and one that also serves as a quick reference point when examining a coin you've pulled from an unknown lot or estate collection. The coin's official weight is 2.268 grams, and while a precision scale accurate to at least the hundredth of a gram is required to use this measurement meaningfully, a coin that deviates significantly from that figure in either direction is sending a signal worth paying attention to, potentially indicating a wrong planchet error, a damaged coin, or in rarer cases a genuine mint anomaly that professional eyes should evaluate. The rim of the coin, that raised border that runs around the perimeter of both sides, should be even and consistent in height when the coin is rotated slowly under light, and any irregularity in that rim, a section that seems lower, a spot where the design bleeds too close to the edge, can be a visual clue pointing toward an off-collar or broad-struck error that changes the coin's story entirely. The conversation about what a 1978 Roosevelt dime might be worth in today's collector market is one that demands both intellectual honesty and genuine curiosity about the documented range of outcomes that different examples have achieved over time. At the baseline, a circulated 1978 Roosevelt dime from either mint pulled from pocket change represents exactly 10 cents in transactional value, and perhaps a small premium from a bulk buyer who deals in common date-clad coinage. And there is nothing wrong with that reality, because most examples of this coin lived exactly the life they were minted for and wear their history in the form of the contact marks, scratches, and softened details that accumulate through years of honest circulation. But the market tells a more complicated and genuinely fascinating story when condition enters the equation at the higher end of the grading scale. 1978 Philadelphia dime certified by PCGS or NGC at the MS65 level, fully uncirculated with only minor bag marks and strong original luster, might realistically trade in the low single digits to perhaps $10 or $15 in a typical transaction, while the same coin pushed to MS67 or MS68 enters a tier where population reports from grading services show dramatically fewer examples. And collector demand from registry set builders and condition specialists can push realized prices into ranges of several tens to a few $100s, though these figures shift with market conditions and are never a promise of what any individual coin will achieve. When a verified mint error enters the picture on a 1978 Roosevelt dime, the market dynamics shift in ways that can genuinely surprise someone who assumed this common date coin had no ceiling worth discussing. Authenticated off-center strikes from this era, where the design is visibly displaced from the coin's center while the date and key design elements remain readable, have appeared in auction archives and dealer inventories with price tags that range from modest collector premiums to several $100s depending on the degree of the error and the eye appeal of the specific example. Double-struck coins, where a second impression of the dies landed on the coin at a rotated or shifted angle, producing a haunting layered image of Roosevelt's portrait or the reverse torch, represent an even more dramatic and visually arresting category of error that collectors of the specialty error series pursue with real competitive energy, and documented examples in attractive condition have achieved values ranging from hundreds of dollars into the low thousands at established auction venues. Always depending on the specific characteristics, the grading service's opinion, and the appetite of the buyers present at the moment of sale. It is worth stating plainly, and without qualification, that these outcomes are not predictions, and cannot be applied universally to any coin without individual examination and professional authentication, because the collector market rewards specificity and punishes assumptions, and the difference between a genuine mint error and a post-mint damaged coin that superficially resembles one can mean the difference between meaningful collector value and zero premium whatsoever. There is a particular quality to the experience of examining a 1978 Roosevelt dime with genuine numismatic intention, a quietness to it, almost like reading a very old letter, because you are holding an object that passed through a very specific moment in American manufacturing history, touched by machines and hands in a facility that was simultaneously producing hundreds of thousands of coins every hour. And yet somehow this one coin made it to you in whatever condition it now presents. Collectors who approach this series, and this date with patience and a willingness to learn the language of die varieties, strike characteristics and surface preservation, sometimes find exactly what they were looking for, and sometimes find something they weren't expecting at all, a doubled inscription and unusual planchet texture, a weight that doesn't quite match, and those moments of discovery are what give this hobby its enduring power over the people who fall into it seriously. If you believe a coin in your possession warrants closer attention, the path forward is always the same. Document it carefully with photographs taken under raking light, weigh it on a calibrated scale, compare it methodically against reference materials and authenticated examples in published population reports, and then submit it to a reputable third-party grading and attribution service before drawing conclusions about what it might represent. The 1978 Roosevelt dime is not the flashiest coin in American numismatic history, but it is a coin that rewards the patient, the observant, and the serious, and somewhere out there, in a jar or a roll or a forgotten envelope in the back of a drawer, there may be an example of this very date and mint that hasn't yet told its full story to anyone who knew how to listen. Step 3. The United States Roosevelt dime, minted in 1988 at the Philadelphia Mint, identified by the small P mint mark that sits quietly to the left of the torch on the reverse side, is one of those coins that most Americans have held without ever truly seeing, a thin clad disc that moved through cash registers and vending machines and coat pockets by the billions without a single person stopping to wonder whether the specific example in their hand might one day occupy a plastic slab in a serious collector's carefully organized registry set. The Philadelphia Mint in 1988 was operating in a period of institutional momentum, having only recently, in 1980, begun placing its P mint mark on dimes after more than a century of leaving Philadelphia-struck coins unmarked. A change that transformed what had been an absence into a presence, giving collectors a new layer of attribution to care about, and a new reason to examine coins that previous generations had dismissed entirely. The 1988 P dime was produced in enormous numbers, with a mintage that reached approximately 1.03 billion pieces, a figure so large it almost defies the imagination when you try to picture individual coins rather than abstract statistics. And yet the numismatic world has demonstrated repeatedly and convincingly that production volume is a starting point for understanding a coin's collectability, not a final verdict. Because the question that actually drives collector markets is never how many were made, but rather how many survived the decades in a condition that still reflects the mint's original intentions rather than the accumulated damage of a life in commerce. 1988 occupies an interesting position in American cultural and political memory. It was a presidential election year, the twilight of the Reagan era, a moment when the country was simultaneously optimistic and anxious in ways that found their way into the music, the cinema, and the news cycles of the time. And the coins minted that year carry that context with them in the way that all manufactured objects carry the fingerprints of their historical moment. Not literally inscribed on their surfaces, but embedded in the conditions under which they were made. The Philadelphia Mint facility, located in the heart of the city that gave birth to the American Republic, was by 1988 a thoroughly modern industrial operation, capable of producing coins at a pace that would have seemed miraculous to the craftsmen who operated the original mint on 7th Street 2 centuries earlier. And the technological sophistication of that production line is part of what makes examining a 1988 P dime so layered an experience for someone who understands the mechanics of coin manufacture. The working dies used to strike these dimes were themselves produced through a multi-stage hubbing process, in which the original master design was transferred through intermediate hubs and working hubs into the hardened steel dies that ultimately met the planchets on the production floor. And each step in that transfer process introduced the possibility, small but real and documented, that something in the impression might shift, double, or distort in a way that would carry forward into every coin struck by that particular die before the anomaly was detected or the die retired from service. The design that graces the 1988 P Roosevelt dime has a lineage that stretches back to 1946, when Chief Engraver John R. Sinek was commissioned to create a portrait honoring President Franklin Delano Roosevelt following his death in April 1945, and the resulting obverse, Roosevelt in strong left-facing profile, his features conveying dignity and resolve without theatrical grandeur. has remained one of the most consistent design elements in American coinage for the better part of 8 decades. What changes from coin to coin, from die to die, and from mint to mint is not the design itself but the quality with which that design was transferred onto each individual planchet. And on the 1988 P dime, those quality differences are real, meaningful, and directly tied to collector value in ways that reward careful examination. A coin struck early in a die's production run, when the die face was freshest and the detail transfer most complete, will show Roosevelt's portrait with a sharpness and three-dimensionality that later strikes from the same die gradually lose as the steel compresses and smooths under the cumulative force of hundreds of thousands of impressions. On a truly exceptional early die-state example preserved in original mint condition, the texture of Roosevelt's hair above the ear and along the crown of his head retains a lifelike complexity that you can almost feel through the magnification of a quality loupe, while the fields surrounding the portrait carry the soft, flowing cartwheel luster that forms when mint-fresh metal reflects light across its undisturbed surface. A visual characteristic that experienced collectors can identify almost instinctively, and that grading services evaluate with precise, documented standards, turning the 1988 P Roosevelt dime to its reverse and examining it with the same focused attention reveals a composition that is deceptively simple on first viewing but genuinely intricate when approached with numismatic seriousness. The central torch, rising vertically through the middle of the design with its flame spreading at the top in a shape that suggests both illumination and upward momentum, is flanked on its left by a delicate olive branch and on its right by an oak branch. The three elements together forming a visual statement about American ideals that was deliberately chosen for its symbolic resonance at a moment when the Roosevelt dime was being introduced as a tribute to a president deeply associated with national perseverance and democratic values. On a well-struck 1988 P example, the interior of the torch flame retains fine engraved lines that define the flame's structure and give it a sense of contained energy, while the individual leaves on both branches show crisp separation and defined veining rather than the flat, merged appearance that develops as a die ages or as a coin accumulates the microscopic surface damage of circulation. The inscriptions on the reverse, United States of America, 1 dime, and EPLURBUSUNUM, should on a high-grade example show clean, sharp letter edges with no bleeding into the surrounding fields, and it is precisely in these inscriptions that certain die varieties reveal themselves to the collector willing to examine each letter individually under magnification, rather than reading the words as a whole and moving on. Responsible examination of a 1988 P Roosevelt dime begins with the fundamentals that any serious collector learns early and returns to consistently. Because the physical characteristics of a coin communicate information that no amount of visual impression from a photograph or casual glance can fully substitute for. The coin's official weight is 2.268 grams, composed of a copper core that accounts for approximately 91.67% of the coin's total metal content bonded to outer layers of a 75% copper and 25% nickel alloy, and a precision scale accurate to at least 2 decimal places, is an essential tool for anyone who wants to move beyond casual observation into genuine analytical examination. A coin that deviates meaningfully from that 2.268 grams standard, either significantly lighter or heavier, is presenting a question that deserves a careful answer, because such deviations can indicate a planchet that was underweight or overweight before striking, a wrong metal error in which the coin was struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, or in some cases post-mint alteration that has no numismatic significance but could mislead an inexperienced examiner. The edge of the coin, where the clad construction reveals itself as that characteristic copper stripe running between the silvery outer layers, should be examined for evenness and completeness, because an edge that shows irregularities in that copper stripe, or that seems thicker or thinner than expected around its circumference, may be pointing toward an off-color striking error or a planchet anomaly that changes the coin's category entirely in the eyes of a specialist. The collector market for 1988 P Roosevelt dimes exists along a spectrum that spans from the completely unremarkable to the genuinely surprising, and understanding where any individual coin sits on that spectrum requires both accurate grading and an honest assessment of what the current market values in terms of condition and variety. At the common end of that spectrum, circulated examples of the 1988 P dime trade at or near face value, representing the honest reality that a coin which spent years in active commerce has sacrificed the surface preservation that collector markets reward, and there is no shame or disappointment in that reality. It simply reflects what the coin was designed to do and what it did faithfully. The picture changes when coins move into the uncirculated tier and begin approaching the upper reaches of the Sheldon grading scale, Because a 1988 P dime certified by PCGS or NGC at MS66 or MS67 occupies a statistical space where population reports confirm that genuine scarcity exists even within a mintage of 1 billion coins. And collectors building competitive registry sets will pay premiums that reflect that documented scarcity rather than the face value that an uninformed observer might assume applies universally. Depending on current market conditions, which shift with collector demand, the broader economy, and the competitive dynamics of active registry set builders, a 1988 P Roosevelt dime at MS67 might realistically attract values ranging from modest double-digit figures to potentially a few $100s. With these estimates always subject to the caveat that no market value is guaranteed, and that the only way to establish what a specific coin is actually worth at a specific moment is to offer it in an active, competitive marketplace with full disclosure of its professionally attributed condition. When mint errors enter the 1988 P Roosevelt dime discussion, the range of possible outcomes expands dramatically, and the storytelling becomes genuinely cinematic in the way that only numismatic error collecting can produce, because error coins are individual objects, each one unique in the specific way that the minting process failed to follow its own rules, and their values reflect that individuality in ways that standard date and mint pricing guides simply cannot capture. The 1988 P dime struck off-center, with Roosevelt's portrait and the surrounding inscriptions visibly displaced from the coin's intended center while the date remains legible, represents a category of error that has a documented collector following and a price range that depends entirely on the percentage of displacement, the preservation of the readable elements, and the overall eye appeal of the specific piece. With authenticated examples in attractive condition having appeared in auction records at figures ranging from the low hundreds to several $100s, though these are historical data points rather than promises about what future sales will produce. More dramatic errors, double strikes, die cap impressions, broad strikes that expand the coin's diameter beyond its standard 17.9 millimeters, or the rare and visually arresting instances of a coin struck on a planchet intended for a foreign denomination or a different American coin entirely, represent the upper tier of error collecting where authenticated examples have in exceptional documented cases attracted values reaching into the thousands of dollars. Always contingent on professional authentication, the specific characteristics of the individual coin, and the competitive appetite of the collectors present at the moment of sale. No value in this category can be assumed, predicted, or transferred from one example to another without the kind of individual professional evaluation that third-party grading services exist specifically to provide. What the 1988 P Roosevelt dime ultimately offers the collector who approaches it with genuine curiosity, and the patience to look past its familiar face, is a lesson that the numismatic hobby teaches through every series and every date it presents for examination. That the gap between a coin's face value and its potential collector significance is a space filled not with certainty but with possibility. And that possibility is worth investigating with the tools and the mindset that serious collecting demands. If you have a 1988 P dime that seems unusual in any respect, a weight that doesn't match the standard, a strike alignment that looks tilted when the coin is rotated and viewed edge-on, a rim that varies in height around its circumference, lettering that seems to echo itself under a loop, or fields that show an unfamiliar texture that doesn't match reference examples, the responsible path is always to photograph it carefully under raking light from multiple angles. Document your observations in writing, compare what you see against authenticated examples in published references and online population databases, and submit it to a reputable third-party grading and attribution service before drawing conclusions, or making any buying or selling decisions based on your own assessment alone. The collector who treats every unusual coin as a question rather than an answer, who seeks professional verification before acting on excitement or assumption, and who understands that the market's verdict is always the final and only reliable measure of a coin's realized value, is the collector who builds a relationship with this hobby that lasts and deepens over time rather than one defined by the disappointment of unverified expectations. And the 1988 P Roosevelt dime, ordinary as it appears in the hand, is as good a place as any to begin or continue that patient, rewarding, endlessly surprising practice. Step 4. The 1925 United States Mercury dime arrives from a moment in American history so vivid and contradictory that it almost feels fictional. A country simultaneously drunk on prosperity and haunted by the shadows of a war that had redrawn the entire map of human civilization just a few years before. A nation of jazz clubs and speakeasies and Model T Fords rattling down roads that were still more mud than pavement in places. And right in the middle of all of that noise and energy, this small silver coin was moving through the economy with the quiet efficiency of something that didn't yet know it would one day be considered one of the most beautiful coins America ever produced. Struck at 3 different mint facilities in 1925, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, the Mercury dime that year entered circulation in the tens of millions, with Philadelphia producing approximately 25.6 million pieces bearing no mint mark, Denver striking roughly 5.1 million carrying the D designation on the reverse, and San Francisco contributing around 3.5 million coins marked with an S. And those mintage differences are not trivial footnotes but central chapters in the story of why some 1925 dimes sit in common date bins at coin shows, while others occupy the kind of protective holders that collectors handle with cotton gloves and a reverence usually reserved for documents rather than pocket change. The series to which this coin belongs was officially titled the Winged Liberty Head Dime when it entered production in 1916, but the public almost immediately began calling it the Mercury dime because the figure on the obverse, the goddess Liberty wearing a winged Phrygian cap, bore such a striking visual resemblance to the Roman messenger god Mercury that the nickname simply stuck and eventually outlasted any effort to correct it. Adolf A. Weinman, the sculptor and designer who created both the Mercury dime and the Walking Liberty half-dollar that entered circulation the same year, brought to the dime a sense of artistic ambition that stood in deliberate contrast to the more mechanical, portrait-heavy coin designs that had dominated American coinage for much of the preceding century. Weinman's Liberty is not simply a face on a coin but a figure caught in a specific emotional register, forward-facing in profile, the winged cap conveying speed and intellectual freedom simultaneously, the features rendered with a softness and humanity that made this dime feel almost alive compared to its predecessors. The reverse, designed with equal care, presents a fasces, a bundle of rods bound together around an axe, alongside a diagonal olive branch, the two elements together communicating a philosophy about American national character that Weinman articulated through visual symbolism rather than inscription. The fasces representing civic unity and the collective strength that bound the republic together, the olive branch representing the nation's preference for peace even as it maintained the readiness to defend itself. By 1925, these design elements had been in production for 9 years, and the working dies used to strike that year's coins were being produced from designs that had already been refined through thousands of impressions, meaning that the 1925 dime carries in its design a kind of accumulated institutional knowledge of how Weinman's original vision could best be transferred into metal. And yet, as any collector who has spent time with this series knows, the gap between a well-struck 1925 Mercury dime and a poorly struck one from the same year represents 2 entirely different collecting experiences. The silver content of the 1925 Mercury dime is not incidental to its story but central to it, because these coins were struck in an alloy of 90% silver and 10% copper, at a time when silver was a working monetary metal rather than a precious commodity held in investment accounts, and that composition gives the coin a physical character that is immediately and unmistakably different from the clad dimes that followed the Coinage Act of 1965. A genuine 1925 Mercury dime should weigh 2.5 grams, a full 10% heavier than a modern clad dime, and that difference is perceptible in the hand even without a scale if you've developed even a basic familiarity with the feel of silver coinage. The coin's color, even after a century of existence, should carry the distinctive warm gray tone of aged silver rather than the bright, slightly clinical shine of nickel-clad modern coinage. And a coin that has been properly stored or was pulled from an old collection in original, undisturbed condition may still show original mint luster in the protected areas around the design elements, the recesses behind Liberty's cap, the low fields between the fasces bands on the reverse. Even if the high points of the design show the gentle friction of age and handling. That original luster, where it survives, is among the most important visual characteristics that grading services evaluate, because it tells the story of a coin that went from the mint to protective storage without passing through the hands, machines, and friction-heavy environments that strip the surface of its original metallic character, and transform a potentially collectible coin into a circulated relic worth, primarily its silver melt value. The 1925 S Mercury dime, produced at the San Francisco Mint with its relatively modest output of 3.5 million pieces, occupies a fundamentally different position in the collector hierarchy than its Philadelphia counterpart, and understanding why requires appreciating something that the raw mintage figure alone doesn't communicate. That the San Francisco Mint's strike quality in the mid-1920s was variable in ways that have produced a population of surviving high-grade examples thin enough to make a fully struck, well-preserved 1925s genuinely scarce in the upper tiers of the grading scale. Mercury dimes are evaluated not only on the standard Sheldon scale from 1 to 70, but also on a supplementary characteristic specific to this series called full bands designation, which refers to the horizontal bands that separate the individual rods of the fasces on the reverse, bands that must be fully struck, fully separated, and clearly defined across their entire width for a coin to receive this additional attribution from PCGS or NGC. The full bands standard is not decorative pedantry but a meaningful measure of strike quality, because achieving complete band definition required a combination of fresh dies, proper planchet preparation, and sufficient striking pressure that not every coin in any given production run received. And a 1925s Mercury dime that achieves both a high Sheldon grade and the full bands designation represents a convergence of survival and production quality that the population reports of major grading services confirm is genuinely rare. The Denver issue, with its 5.1 million pieces, tells yet another story, one in which die quality and striking pressure varied across the production run in ways that serious variety collectors have documented and debated for decades, adding a layer of technical complexity to the 1925D that rewards the specialist who goes beyond date and mint into the finer granularity of individual die marriages. Examining a 1925 Mercury dime with the attention it deserves means moving slowly and methodically through its surfaces in a way that feels almost archaeological, because you are working with an object that is now a full century old, and that carries on its surfaces the accumulated evidence of everything that has happened to it since the day it left the coining press. Begin with the obverse and locate the fine details of Weinmann's Liberty portrait, the individual strands of hair visible beneath and around the winged cap on a well-struck example, the delicate modeling of the facial features that gives the portrait its distinctive softness, and the precise shape of the wing itself, which on a sharp strike shows feather-like internal lines rather than a smooth, undifferentiated shape that results from die wear or insufficient striking pressure. Move your examination to the date, positioned at the lower left of the obverse, where the 4 digits of 1925 should show clean, complete definition without the mushiness or weakness that can affect coins struck from tired dies or at the wrong pressure, and where the digits themselves can occasionally reveal, under careful magnification, evidence of die varieties including repunched dates in which the traces of a previously positioned date show through beneath the primary impression. On the reverse, the fasces should command your most sustained attention, not as a decorative element to be noted and moved past, but as the single most diagnostically important design feature on the coin because the quality of its strike, the crispness of its bands, and the depth of its relief relative to the surrounding fields tells you more about what this coin went through during its production and its life than almost any other single observation you can make. The collector market for 1925 Mercury dimes in the current era reflects a combination of genuine historical affection for the series, sophisticated awareness of the population data that third-party grading services have accumulated over decades of certification, and the broader dynamics of silver coin collecting that make condition and strike quality the primary drivers of value rather than date and mint alone in all but the rarest cases. A circulated 1925 P dime in a grade of very fine to extremely fine showing clear design detail, but with obvious wear on the high points of Liberty's cap and the fasces bands, might realistically trade in the range of several dollars to perhaps $15 or $20 in today's market, with the silver melt value providing a meaningful floor that moves with the spot price of silver. The 1925D and 1925S in comparable circulated grades command modest premiums over the Philadelphia issue that reflect their lower original mintages, but the premium becomes significantly more pronounced as condition improves and the population of surviving examples at each grade level thins dramatically. An NGC or PCGS certified 1925S in MS64 might attract collector interest in the range of a few $100s in a typical market environment, while examples pushing into MS65 and above, especially those carrying the full bands designation, have appeared in major auction records at figures ranging from several hundred to well over $1,000, depending on the specific characteristics of the coin. The competition among bidders at the moment of sale, and the broader condition of the collector market at that time. These figures represent observations from auction archives and collector market discussions rather than guarantees of what any individual coin will achieve, and the only reliable way to understand what a specific example is worth is to have it professionally evaluated, and then offer it in an active, transparent marketplace. Among the phenomena that Mercury dime collectors encounter when working with 1925 dated examples, die varieties represent one of the most intellectually engaging dimensions of the series, because they connect the abstract history of mint production to the specific, tangible evidence visible on individual coins, in ways that reward patience and magnification with discoveries that the casual observer walking past a coin show table would never detect. The Cherry Picker's Guide and other variety references document specific die marriages within Mercury dime production across various years. And while the 1925 issues are not among the most heavily attributed variety years in the series, collectors who have spent serious time with these coins have identified and documented instances of repunched mint marks on the Denver and San Francisco issues, as well as obverse die varieties characterized by subtle differences in the positioning or character of specific design elements that become apparent only through systematic comparison of multiple examples against a documented reference standard. These varieties rarely produce the dramatic visual impact of a major doubled die error in a more modern coin, but within the Mercury dime specialist community, they carry genuine significance and can influence the desirability of a specific example meaningfully enough to affect what a knowledgeable buyer will pay for it, which is precisely why attribution research and professional opinion matter so much before any conclusion about value is drawn. The collector who dismisses variety attribution as excessive technical detail is the same collector who might miss the characteristic that transforms a modestly valuable coin into something that a specialist will actively compete to acquire. The 1925 Mercury dime is, at its core, a coin that has outlasted the world that made it by a full century. The economy that produced it collapsed just 4 years after its minting. The generation that spent it has been gone for decades, and the mint facilities that struck its different versions have undergone transformations that would make them unrecognizable to the workers who stood at those coining presses in 1925. And yet here it is, still bearing Weinman's liberty in recognizable detail on millions of surviving examples, still carrying its silver content, still connecting anyone who holds it to a specific and irretrievable moment in American life. If you have a 1925 Mercury dime in your possession and have never examined it with the kind of focused, systematic attention that this script has encouraged, the path forward is clear and worth following. Weigh it, observe its color and luster, examine its strike quality under magnification beginning with the fasces bands, look at the rim for evenness and completeness. Study the date and any mint mark for evidence of variety characteristics, and then, if what you find seems significant enough to warrant it, submit it to a professional third-party grading service whose opinion will establish its condition, attribution, and authenticity in terms that the broader collector market will recognize and trust. Values in this market are never guaranteed. Collector demand shifts with time and circumstance, and the difference between an informed selling decision and a regretted one is almost always the difference between professional authentication and assumption. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because the history of American coinage is filled with coins that look ordinary until the right person looks at them the right way, and the next one we examine may be closer to your own collection than you think. Step 5. The United States 1917 Mercury dime entered the world at one of the most consequential turning points in modern history, struck into existence at a moment when the United States was standing at the very edge of a decision that would alter the course of the 20th century. America would formally enter the First World War in April of that year, sending a generation of young men across the Atlantic into a conflict that had already consumed millions of lives across the European landscape, and the coins being produced at that precise moment carry within them, invisibly but unmistakably, the weight of that historical threshold. The Mercury dime series itself was only 1 year old in 1917, having debuted in 1916 as part of a sweeping artistic renaissance in American coinage that also produced the Standing Liberty Quarter and the Walking Liberty Half Dollar. And the 1917 issue represented the first full production year for a design that was still finding its footing in terms of die quality, striking consistency, and the technical refinements that mint engravers and production staff were working through in real time as the presses ran. 3 mint facilities contributed to the 1917 Mercury dime's total production. Philadelphia struck approximately 55.2 million pieces without a mint mark. Denver produced around 9.4 million bearing the D designation on the reverse, and San Francisco contributed roughly 27.3 million carrying the S, and those 3 numbers tell 3 different stories about availability, survival rates, and the collector dynamics that have shaped how the 1917 date is approached by everyone from beginners pulling coins from inherited collections to advanced specialists hunting specific die marriages with reference books and decades of accumulated pattern recognition. The Denver issue, with its comparatively modest output, has always drawn particular attention from collectors who understand that lower mintage figures combined with the circulation pressures of a wartime economy created conditions under which high-grade survival became genuinely difficult, and the population reports maintained by professional grading services confirm that scarcity in the upper condition tiers is not a marketing narrative, but a documented statistical reality. Adolf Weinmann's design for the Mercury dime has been praised by numismatists, art historians, and casual observers alike for a quality that is surprisingly difficult to articulate but immediately recognizable when you hold a well-struck example under proper lighting. It has a sense of motion, of air, of the impression that the figure on the coin exists in a specific instant rather than a frozen eternity. And achieving that impression in a coin intended for mass production at the rate of millions per week required a level of die craftsmanship that the Mint's engraving staff approached with genuine seriousness even under the production pressures of a major industrial operation. The obverse presents Liberty in left-facing profile, the winged Phrygian cap on her head rendered with enough internal detail on a sharply struck example to show individual feather structures within the wing itself, her hair flowing back from her face in a way that required multiple die-cutting passes to achieve the layered depth that distinguished Weinmann's original plaster model from the simplified versions that compromised dyes or excessive wear would eventually produce. What makes examining a 1917 Mercury dime specifically compelling is that this was only the second year the design was being produced, meaning that Mint engravers were still calibrating the relationship between Weinmann's sculptural intentions and the practical realities of high-speed coinage production. And that calibration process produced a year of coins in which the variation between the best-struck and worst-struck examples is wider than it would later become as production methods matured and standardized. On the reverse, the fasces and olive branch composition that Weinmann designed carries its own internal hierarchy of detail. The binding straps that hold the rod bundle together, the axe blade emerging from the bundle's top, the individual leaves and berries of the olive branch, and the degree to which these elements are present, sharp, and fully realized on any given 1917 example, is a direct function of die quality, striking pressure, and planchet preparation that varies not just from mint to mint, but from die to die and even from the beginning to the end of a single die's production run. 1917 was a year in which silver was not yet the investment commodity it would later become, but was instead an everyday monetary metal so integrated into American commercial life that people carried it in their pockets without a second thought, and the Mercury dimes being struck that year were intended for immediate active circulation in an economy that was simultaneously managing the financial demands of wartime mobilization and the ordinary commercial activity of a country of over 100 million people, conducting daily transactions in hardware stores, department stores, streetcar ticket booths, and corner grocery shops across a continent. The coins that went into circulation in 1917 experienced a commercial life that was genuinely brutal from a preservation standpoint. They moved through cash drawers, change purses, coat pockets, and counting machines at a pace and volume that produced the kind of surface contact that numismatists measure in grades, and that manifests visually as the gradual softening and eventual obliteration of the fine detail that makes a well-struck Mercury dime so remarkable in the first place. Understanding this circulation history is essential context for appreciating why the collector market places such a premium on 1917 Mercury dimes that escaped that commercial gauntlet coins that were set aside in original rolls, tucked into collections, or simply never spent, and that survived the subsequent century in conditions that still reflect something of the Mint's original intentions, rather than the accumulated evidence of a century of human commerce. The silver alloy used in these coins, 90% silver and 10% copper, producing a coin with an official weight of 2.5 grams, gave them a physical durability that allowed millions to survive in circulated condition. But the surface preservation required for high-grade numismatic significance is an entirely different standard from mere physical survival, and it is that standard that makes truly original lustrous. Well-struck 1917 Mercury dimes meaningful objects in the collector market rather than simply historical artifacts. The technical vocabulary of Mercury dime collecting becomes most significant when applied to the 1917 issue's reverse design. Specifically in relation to the full bands designation that PCGS and NGC award to examples where the horizontal bands separating the fasces into its component sections are completely struck, fully separated across their entire width, and clearly defined against the surrounding design elements without any bridging or weakness that suggests incomplete metal flow during the striking process. The full band standard matters because it is not simply an aesthetic preference but a measurable indicator of the striking conditions under which a specific coin was produced. A coin that achieves full bands received, at the moment of its creation, a combination of die sharpness, planchet quality, and press pressure that placed it in the minority of coins produced by any given die. And a 1917 Mercury dime that carries both a high Sheldon grade and full bands attribution represents a convergence of original production quality and subsequent preservation that the population data maintained by grading services confirms is genuinely uncommon. The 1917 D issue is particularly interesting in this context because the Denver mint strike quality that year showed more variability than Philadelphia's, meaning that fully struck examples from Denver are proportionally rarer within their already smaller total population, a compounding of scarcity factors that serious collectors understand, and that the market reflects when certified high-grade 1917D examples appear at auction. Beyond full bands, the 1917 issues across all three mints have attracted the attention of variety specialists who work with the detailed die study resources available to serious Mercury dime collectors. And while the 1917 date is not the most heavily documented variety year in the series, researchers have identified and cataloged specific die marriages, repunched mint mark varieties on the Denver and San Francisco issues, and obverse characteristics that distinguish individual die uses in ways that add another dimension of collectability to an already layered numismatic subject. Holding a 1917 Mercury dime and conducting the kind of examination that serious collectors practice requires both the right tools and the right mindset, the patience to move slowly, the discipline to document what you observe before drawing conclusions, and the intellectual humility to recognize that professional graders and variety specialists have developed their expertise through years of comparative examination that cannot be replicated through enthusiasm alone. However genuine that enthusiasm might be, begin your examination with the coin's weight, using a precision scale calibrated to at least 2 decimal places, and confirm that the coin registers at or very near 2.5 grams. A meaningful deviation from that figure in a coin of this era could indicate a damaged or altered piece, a planchet anomaly, or in rare cases a genuine mint error, all of which require professional evaluation to characterize accurately. The coin's color should be the warm, slightly gray tone of aged silver that a century of existence produces naturally, not the bright mirror-like appearance of a freshly polished surface, because cleaning a silver coin even gently and with the best intentions permanently alters the surface in ways that experienced graders can detect instantly, and that reduce numismatic value significantly relative to an original, undisturbed surface. Examine the rim under magnification and rotate the coin slowly, looking for evenness in rim height and completeness in rim definition all the way around the circumference of both sides, because irregularities in the rim can point toward collar issues during striking or postmint damage that affects both the coin's grade and its authenticity status. The date digits and any mint mark should be studied carefully under a quality loupe for evidence of repunching, doubling, or die variety characteristics that might warrant comparison against published variety references before the coin is attributed or offered in any marketplace. The collector market for 1917 Mercury dimes in the current numismatic environment reflects a combination of factors that have been building for decades: the enduring aesthetic reputation of the Mercury dime series as a whole, the specific historical context of 1917 as the first full production year following the design's debut, and the supply and demand dynamics created by a finite and slowly diminishing population of high-grade survivors meeting a collector community that has grown more sophisticated and better documented in terms of what it knows and values. A circulated 1917 P dime in the grades between fine and very fine, showing clear but worn design detail with Liberty's facial features and the basic fasces structure still identifiable, might realistically trade in a range of several dollars to perhaps $20 or $30 in a typical current market environment, with the silver content providing a meaningful floor that moves with precious metal prices, and that distinguishes these coins from their clad successors even at the lowest grades. The 1917D and 1917S incomparable circulated grades command premiums over the Philadelphia issue that reflect their lower mintages, and those premiums increase as condition improves, and the documented population of surviving examples at each grade level becomes more restricted. A PCGS or NGC certified 1917S in MS64, with original luster and strong strike characteristics might attract collector attention in the range of several $100s in a competitive market, while examples at MS65 and above, particularly those with full bands designation, have appeared in major auction results at figures ranging from several hundred to multiple thousands of dollars, depending on the specific qualities of the coin. The competition among active bidders and the broader collector market conditions at the time of sale, with all of these figures representing historical observations rather than predictions or guarantees of future results. Among the rarest and most dramatically compelling 1917 Mercury dimes that have passed through professional authentication, and appeared in documented auction or dealer records, are those bearing characteristics that place them outside the standard range of production variation and into the territory of genuine mint errors. Coins where something in the mechanical process of their creation departed from the intended parameters in ways that are visible, verifiable, and significant to specialists who catalog and study such anomalies. Off-center strikes from 1917, in which the coin's design is visibly displaced from its intended centered position while the date remains readable, are scarce enough that authenticated examples generate real competition among error collectors when they appear in the marketplace, with values depending heavily on the percentage of displacement, the completeness of the visible design elements, and the overall preservation of the specific piece. Die cap errors, dramatic double strikes, and coins struck on planchets with pre-existing lamination flaws or surface splits represent additional categories of 1917 Mercury dime errors that have been documented and authenticated. And while none of these should be assumed present in any coin without professional verification, their existence in the documented historical record is a genuine reminder that even a coin struck over a century ago can carry characteristics that separate it from its millions of siblings in ways that the market recognizes and rewards. The important discipline for anyone who believes they may have encountered an unusual 1917 Mercury dime is to resist the temptation to clean it, test it aggressively, or represent it as anything other than a coin whose characteristics appear unusual and require professional evaluation. Because the authentication process, however it resolves, produces a documented answer that is far more valuable than an undocumented assumption regardless of which direction the conclusion goes. The 1917 Mercury dime is a coin that carries a century of American history in its silver content, its design, and the simple fact of its survival. And the collectors who pursue it seriously understand that what they are really collecting is not just a graded numismatic object, but a tangible connection to a year when the country was transforming in ways that its citizens could feel but not yet fully understand. A year when the coins in everyone's pockets were the same coins being produced in mint facilities that were themselves part of a national infrastructure being stress-tested by the demands of an approaching global conflict. If you have a 1917 Mercury dime in your possession, whether it came from a family collection, an estate sale, a coin show purchase, or a lot of old silver you've been meaning to sort through for years, the most responsible and rewarding thing you can do with it is examine it carefully with the tools and methods that this script has outlined. Document your observations honestly, compare what you find against published references and certified population data, and then seek professional grading or attribution from a reputable third-party service before making any decisions about buying, selling, or simply understanding what you have. Market values for coins like this are genuine, sometimes significant, and always interesting, but they are also always estimates, always dependent on the specific characteristics of individual coins and the conditions of specific markets at specific moments, and never something that can be assumed or predicted with certainty for any coin that hasn't been professionally evaluated and offered in a transparent, competitive marketplace where knowledgeable buyers set the price through their actual bidding behavior. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because American numismatic history is filled with coins whose surfaces hold more meaning than their face values suggest. And the next historical discovery we explore together might be hiding in a place you've already walked past 100 times without knowing what you were looking at.